London sleeps, fog drifts, rivers whisper, and history waits awake. Tonight is not about battles, but about listening to a city that learned fear before it learned sleep at night. Before you drift any deeper, if this quiet helps you feel safe tonight, you're welcome to stay with us. Subscribing softly keeps this place gentle and lets these nights continue. Now, rest. London in the year 900 does not glow. It does not shimmer. It does not announce itself to the night. It merely fades. What people will one day call a great city is, for now, a modest cluster of wooden homes pressed tightly together as if huddling for warmth or courage. Roofs sag slightly under the weight of damp air. Walls smell of smoke, rot, and old rain. Streets are narrow, uneven, and mostly unpaved. More suggestion than structure. When the wind moves through them, it carries whispers rather than sound. This is not London the capital. This is London the habit. A place people endure more than admire. A thin mist creeps up from the Thames, rolling lazily between buildings like a tired animal, looking for a place to lie down. The river itself moves slowly tonight, dark and heavy, reflecting nothing. It does not sparkle under moonlight. It absorbs it. If rivers could hold their breath, this one would be doing so now. The church bells are silent, not because they are broken, not because there is no one to ring them, but because nothing has happened yet. Inside the houses, doors are barred. Wooden shutters are pulled tight, though they block little more than hope. Families lie close together on straw beds. Children curl into their parents' sides. Dogs are brought indoors, not for comfort, but because an animal left outside might start barking, and barking at night has consequences. People go to sleep early in London, and they always have. Not because they are tired, but because darkness is persuasive. It tells you that staying awake changes nothing. It suggests that whatever is coming will arrive whether you are watching or not. So they close their eyes. Some pray, some listen. Some pretend they hear nothing at all. There is no evening news to reassure them. No late-night announcement to explain strange sounds. No official voice to say, "Remain calm." There is no newspaper either, no ink, no headlines, no comforting authority of printed words, and certainly no Twitter, no endless scroll of panic, delivered conveniently to the palm of your hand. Fear, in this London, travels the old-fashioned way, mouth to ear, neighbor to neighbor, growing larger with every retelling. By now, everyone has heard something. A cousin in a riverside village who vanished, a monk who arrived barefoot and shaking, refusing to speak above a whisper, a merchant whose boat returned without its crew, drifting as if confused. No one agrees on details. Everyone agrees on the feeling. It is the kind of fear that does not scream. It sits. It waits. It politely clears its throat. In the back of your mind. London has lived like this for years, balanced between memory and rumor. The Romans are gone, but their shadows remain. Cracked stone walls still trace the outline of something grander, something that once believed permanence was possible. Now weeds grow between those stones, and people pass them without looking, as if eye contact might awaken old expectations. The city feels old and young at the same time. Old enough to remember being important, young enough to be uncertain it ever will be again. Somewhere, a candle flickers and dies. Somewhere else, a man wakes suddenly, heart racing, unable to explain why. He listens for footsteps that do not come. He tells himself it is nothing. He tells himself this every night. Occasionally, he believes it. Outside, the fog thickens. London at night has a way of making everything sound closer than it is. Footsteps echo too long. A shifting beam creaks like a warning. Even the water seems louder after dark, lapping gently against the banks, repeating the same motion over and over as if rehearsing. If you stand still long enough, the city begins to feel like it is holding something back. History, as it turns out, prefers the night shift. Daytime is for kings and laws and sermons. Nighttime is where decisions happen quietly, without witnesses. Night is where borders blur, where rivers become roads, where strangers arrive unannounced. And London knows this, even if it cannot say it aloud. That is why no one truly sleeps. They rest, perhaps. They drift. They hover in that uncomfortable space between waking and dreaming, where every sound feels important and every silence feels suspicious. Sleep here is not surrender. It is negotiation. In one home, a woman counts breaths until she loses track. In another, a man grips a knife he has never used. In a third, a child dreams of waves without knowing why. The Thames continues its slow movement, carrying more than water. It carries stories. It carries possibilities. It carries the uncomfortable truth that England is not an island at night. Not really. Rivers open inward. Coastlines invite visitors. And visitors, history has learned, do not always knock. Still, London lies quiet. From above, if such a view were possible, it would look peaceful, almost beautiful, a soft shape pressed into darkness, unaware of how small it is, unaware of how visible. The city does not know what is coming, but it knows enough to be afraid. And far beyond the fog, far beyond the river's bend, there are others who are very much awake. The whispers about those who came from the sea. By morning, London speaks again. Not loudly, never loudly. It speaks the way frightened places always do, sideways in fragments, behind hands and half-closed doors. Rumors move faster than carts, faster than prayers, faster than truth. They slip through alleys with the fog, curl around corners, and settle into kitchens where bread is torn instead of cut. A word here, a glance there. Always the same beginning, never the same ending. They came from the sea. No one ever says it plainly at first. They dress it up, soften it, test the air to see who is listening. But eventually the phrase lands, heavy and familiar, like something everyone has been expecting but hoping not to hear. The people in the stories are always described the same way. Tall, broad, hair the color of wheat left too long in the sun, beards thick and red, or blonde, or sometimes both, because fear is not known for its attention to detail. They smell of salt and iron and wet leather, of cold water and long journeys, of places where the land ends and the world becomes uncertain. They are called many things: Northmen, sea wolves, pagans, devils, Men who laugh while killing, though no one can quite remember hearing that laughter themselves. Children hear the stories first. Parents do not mean to pass them on. They slip out unintentionally the way truths often do when wrapped in warnings. Behave, a mother says, pulling a blanket higher. Sleep, or the men from the north will come. The child does not ask who the men from the north are. Children rarely ask the questions adults hope they will. They simply absorb the image, cold hands, strange voices, a boat appearing where it should not be. By the next night, the child is repeating the story to another child, adding details, sharper teeth, bigger axes, eyes that glow just slightly in the dark. Thus, a legend grows legs. Somewhere near the river, a fisherman swears he saw shapes moving against the current, long and low, like shadows that knew where they were going. He did not stay to look. No sensible person ever does. Another man claims he heard singing carried over the water, deep voices, slow and rhythmic, not like church hymns at all. He admits this only after a second cup of ale and denies it immediately after. Merchants begin to count heads. Someone notices that a trader who usually arrives every third week has not come at all. Someone else mentions a boat found drifting downstream, its ropes cut cleanly, its cargo untouched, as if whoever took the crew had not been interested in goods. That detail unsettles people more than theft ever could. Goods can be replaced. People are less reliable. A monk arrives at the edge of town, robe torn, eyes hollow. He speaks of fire, of shouting, of men who did not cross themselves before killing. By the time the story reaches the market square, the fire has grown taller, the men have grown taller, and the monk has become either a hero or a coward, depending on who is telling it. A small monastery upriver is said to have burned in the night. No one can confirm it, no one has been there since. But the story spreads anyway, because it fits too neatly into the shape everyone already recognizes. Fear, when given a pattern, clings to it. What is remarkable is how few people can say they have actually seen these Northmen. Faces are always just out of sight. The encounter always happened to someone else, a cousin, a brother's friend, a man from the next village over. Always close enough to feel real, always far enough to avoid questions. There is a strange comfort in this distance, because if no one here has truly seen them, then perhaps they are not truly here. Perhaps they exist only at the edges, on the water, in the fog, in stories told too late at night. Perhaps London is still safe if one does not look too closely. This is how a city bargains with itself. People gather in small groups, speaking in low tones, leaning in as if sound itself might betray them. Every unfamiliar accent becomes suspicious. Every stranger is measured not by what he does, but by how he looks doing it. Hair color matters more than character, height more than intent. A man with light hair notices the glances. He keeps his head down. Someone jokes, weakly, that at least these sea raiders are punctual. They always come when the weather's bad, he says, forcing a laugh. No one joins him. Humor, like courage, requires an audience. There is a saying going around London now, delivered with a shrug and a crooked smile. No one has ever met a Viking, but everyone has an uncle who has. It is meant to sound clever. It is meant to release tension. Instead, it reveals something deeper, how fear prefers secondhand certainty. If the danger is always one story removed, then perhaps it can be kept at bay with words alone. But the stories are changing. They are becoming more detailed, more confident, less like warnings and more like recollections. The men from the sea are no longer vague shapes. They have habits now, preferences, cruel jokes. They choose churches first, some say, because gold is softer than iron and prayers do not fight back. Others insist that is nonsense, that they attack wherever the river allows, because rivers are invitations written in water. Paranoia settles in quietly. Boats are pulled farther onto shore. Locks are checked twice, then a third time for good measure. People begin to notice how exposed London really is, how easily the Thames curves inward, leading straight to the heart of everything. What once felt like protection now feels like a door, left ajar. And still, no one has proof. That is the most unsettling part, not knowing where the stories end and the danger begins. Living in a place where imagination does half the work and the other half is done by silence. At night, people listen harder than they used to. They mistake wind for oars, water for footsteps. They learn the sound of their own breathing because anything unfamiliar feels like a warning. London does not panic. It never does all at once. Panic would require agreement, and agreement is rare. Instead, the city frays around the edges. It becomes cautious, watchful, tired. Yet beneath the fear, beneath the rumors and exaggerations, something else is trying to surface. A quieter truth, easily missed among the noise. The men from the north are not spirits. They are not monsters born of fog and superstition. They are not punishment sent by an angry god, though some priests might suggest otherwise. They are men, with hands that blister, with backs that ache, with mouths that get hungry, and reasons that make sense to them, even if they terrify everyone else. But London is not ready for that thought yet. It is easier to fear a legend than to understand a person, easier to imagine red-bearded demons than to consider that someone, somewhere, looked at this river and saw opportunity, easier to whisper than to ask why. So the stories continue, growing heavier as they pass from voice to voice. Each retelling adds another layer, another certainty built on uncertainty. By the time night falls again, London feels older than it did the night before. More experienced, less innocent. And somewhere beyond the mouth of the Thames, beyond the reach of rumor and prayer, oars dip into dark water with practiced rhythm. The men holding them are not thinking about legends. They are thinking about timing. Who the Vikings really were and how little they cared about your opinion. To understand the fear, London first needs to misunderstand the people. That is usually how these things work. Legends are born not from what is seen, but from what is convenient to believe. And for London, believing that the Vikings were something other than human was, in a strange way, comforting. Monsters can be blamed. Monsters do not ask difficult questions. Monsters arrive fully formed, with no backstory worth examining. But the truth, as it often does, is quieter and far less dramatic, which is exactly what makes it more unsettling. The men approaching England's rivers were not creatures of myth. They were not even full-time villains. They were farmers who knew how to fight, traders who knew when to steal, and sailors who understood that the sea rewards preparation more than courage. In short, they were practical people, and practicality has never been kind to those on the receiving end. A Viking, in his own world, did not wake up each morning thinking of England. He woke up thinking about land that refused to grow crops, winters that lasted too long, and mouths that needed feeding regardless of the weather. Scandinavia in this period was not a place that encouraged leisure. Soil was thin, summers were short, survival was a communal effort, and idleness was a luxury few could afford. So men learned to do many things. They farmed when the ground allowed it. They fished when the seas were generous. They traded when routes were open. And when opportunity appeared in the form of poorly defended wealth, they did not feel obligated to look away. Violence to them was not a personality trait. It was a skill, like carpentry or navigation. Not everyone carried an axe every day, but everyone knew how to use one if the situation demanded it. A man who could not defend himself, his family, or his reputation was a liability. In that world, reputation mattered almost as much as food, perhaps more. Stories traveled quickly in small societies, and being known as weak was an invitation. So children grew up learning not just how to sow seeds or mend nets, but how to stand their ground. The result was a population that looked frightening to outsiders, not because they were unusually cruel, but because they were unusually prepared. The word Viking itself did not mean what London imagined it meant. It was not a nationality. It was an activity. To go a Viking was to leave home temporarily in search of profit. Sometimes that profit came through trade, sometimes through mercenary work, and sometimes through taking what was easier to take than to earn. A man could be a Viking one season and a farmer the next. There was no contradiction in that, only efficiency. London, of course, did not make this distinction. It rarely mattered to those watching their world approach on the horizon whether the men rowing toward them planned to trade silver or remove it. What the people of London did not see, but might have recognized if they had, was how ordinary these men were among themselves. They argued, they negotiated, they worried about whether the risk was worth the reward. Raids were not chaotic bursts of savagery. They were planned with care, discussed over meals, and reconsidered more than once. Rivers were memorized, tides were studied, timing mattered, surprise mattered. Luck mattered less than preparation, though no one ever admitted that aloud. The idea of the Viking as a mindless destroyer was comforting fiction. Mindless destroyers do not require analysis. Organized ones do. From the perspective of these northern men, England was not sacred ground. It was a landscape shaped by opportunity, rivers that led inland, settlements clustered close to water, wealth accumulated in churches and towns that believed faith or tradition might protect them. This was not malice, it was observation. London, sitting comfortably along the Thames, was not a symbol, it was a calculation, a place where effort and reward seemed pleasantly out of balance, like a store that forgot to lock its doors at night. It would be inaccurate to say the Vikings hated London. Hatred implies emotional investment. Hatred requires time and attention. London did not receive either. It was noticed, evaluated, and placed into a category that mattered far more to practical men, useful. The city existed. It was accessible. It had resources. That was enough. If anything, the Vikings' relationship to places like London was almost polite in its indifference. They did not come to make a point. They came to make use of what was there. Among themselves, they did not speak of terror or glory in the way later stories would suggest. They spoke of shares, of who would get what, of how long they could stay before the risks outweighed the benefits. A successful venture was one where everyone returned home with something to show for it and fewer enemies than they had expected. Death was accepted, but not romanticized. That particular habit would be added later by people who did not have to live with the consequences. Even their appearance, so feared in the South, was less theatrical than rumor suggested. They did not dress to intimidate. They dressed for weather and work. Beards were practical in cold climates. Hair was kept long or braided for reasons of habit and identity, not to frighten children in distant villages. Yet to the people of London, seeing unfamiliar styles was enough. Difference has always been a reliable accelerant for fear. Add weapons and silence, and imagination does the rest. Religion, too, played its part in the misunderstanding. The Vikings did not share London's God, and London found this deeply unsettling. Men who did not fear the same divine punishments seemed unpredictable, perhaps uncontrollable. What London did not realize was that the Vikings feared plenty. They feared dishonor. They feared scarcity. They feared being forgotten. Their gods reflected their world, just as London's reflected its own. But theology is rarely discussed calmly when someone is coming toward you with a ship. What made the Vikings particularly effective was not their strength or their ferocity, but their adaptability. They learned quickly. They observed how places defended themselves and adjusted accordingly. They noticed patterns. They exploited complacency. When something stopped working, they changed it. This flexibility was not glamorous, but it was devastating. Static defenses fail against moving minds, and London, for all its history, was still thinking, like a place that believed yesterday's walls were enough. From the Viking point of view, London was not asleep. It was predictable. Predictability is far more dangerous. It means routes are known, responses are delayed, assumptions go unchallenged. The Thames did not look like a threat to them. It looked like a guide. A long, dark line pointing inward, offering access to a place that had not yet learned to look back at the water with suspicion. There is a quiet irony here. London feared the Vikings as forces of chaos, yet what truly threatened the city was order, the careful order of men who planned, prepared, and understood exactly how much risk they were willing to tolerate. Chaos burns bright and fast. Order endures. And endurance, more than anything else, reshapes history. None of this mattered to the people whispering behind closed doors. To them, the Vikings were still shadows with axes, faceless and intent on destruction. Understanding requires distance, and fear collapses distance until everything feels immediate. London did not want to know who these men really were. Knowing would mean acknowledging that what approached was not an aberration, but a response. Not evil incarnate, but competition. And competition is harder to pray away. So the stories remained convenient. Monsters from the sea, devils in human shape, men without mercy or reason. It was easier to believe that than to accept that someone had looked at London and simply seen an opportunity too obvious to ignore. Because once you accept that, another thought follows naturally. If the Vikings saw London as convenient, then convenience would not be accidental. It would be deliberate. And if something is deliberate, it can be improved upon. And the Vikings, when they saw something convenient, were very good at preparing to take advantage of it. Before the storm, How London prepared to defend itself. London does not sit completely naked before the threat. That would be too simple, too honest. Instead, it wraps itself in layers of effort, habit, and inherited confidence, hoping these will pass for preparation. The city has defenses. It always has. They just happen to belong to another century, another empire, and another way of thinking about danger. The walls are the first thing people mention when reassurance is needed. Stone laid by Romans long gone, fitted with care and ambition, built for legions that marched in formation and believed in straight lines. Even now, centuries later, the walls still stand in places, cracked, weathered, interrupted by newer wooden structures, leaning against them like excuses. They look impressive from a distance. From close up, they tell a different story. Mortar crumbles under damp fingers. Stones are missing, repurposed into houses or roads, or simply stolen over time by necessity. The walls were not designed for this London. They were designed for a city that no longer exists. Still, people point to them. They always do. Old defenses have a way of comforting new generations, especially when no one remembers how they were meant to be used. They've protected us before, someone says, as if stone remembers loyalty, as if time respects intention. The walls hear this patiently and say nothing. Beyond the walls, the river remains both guardian and liability. It is wide, it is slow, and it has always been there. London relies on it for trade, for food, for movement. It has never been taught to see the Thames as a weapon aimed inward. To do so would require a change in imagination, and imagination, like courage, is often in short supply when it is most needed. The city does what cities do when uncertainty rises. It organizes meetings. Men gather in rooms heavy with smoke and stale air, arguing over plans that feel better when spoken aloud than when examined closely. Should they strengthen the walls? With what stone and whose labor? Should they station guards along the river? How many and for how long? Should they send word to neighboring settlements, risking panic, or keep quiet and hope discretion will protect them? Someone suggests paying. Tribute, they call it, using a word that sounds more dignified than ransom. Gold is cheaper than blood, they argue. Another man counters the payment, invites return. Once you open your purse, you advertise that it contains something worth opening again. The room divides neatly, as rooms always do. No one mentions that both sides may be right. Outside these rooms, London's militia prepares in the way militias always have, earnestly, imperfectly, and far too late. The men called to defend the city are farmers, craftsmen, laborers, people whose hands are more accustomed to tools than weapons. Spears are checked, many of them warped or repaired, more times than anyone remembers. Shields bear dents from training, not battle, which is meant to be reassuring and fails at it completely. Armor, where it exists, is mismatched and inherited. Courage is plentiful. Experience is not. They drill in open spaces, repeating movements taught by men who learned them secondhand. The motions look convincing enough from afar. Up close, they reveal hesitation, the kind that cannot be trained out in a few afternoons. These are not cowards. They are people who understand, instinctively, that standing in a line against someone who has done this before is not a fair exchange. Leadership watches and nods because leadership is expected to nod. To acknowledge doubt openly would be to invite collapse. Better to pretend that readiness is a matter of appearance. Better to believe that the act of preparing itself is enough. There is a quiet absurdity to it all, though few would dare to laugh. London's defense plan, when reduced to its essentials, relies heavily on optimism. Optimism that the attackers will not come at night. Optimism that they will be few. Optimism that they will be distracted by easier targets elsewhere. And above all, optimism that they will be tired, careless, or perhaps simply lazy. It is a fragile hope, but it is a popular one. People reinforce doors with extra beams. They hide valuables under floors, behind walls, inside containers so well concealed they sometimes forget them later. Churches pray louder. Priests remind congregations that faith has protected them before, carefully avoiding specifics. The air fills with small, individual acts of defense, none of which address the larger problem, but all of which provide comfort. Comfort at this stage is currency. The leadership debates continue. Should messengers be sent to higher authorities? To kings who are busy with their own problems, their own borders, their own calculations? Messages take time. Responses take longer. By the time help arrives, if it arrives at all, the question may already be irrelevant. Still, letters are drafted. Seals are pressed. Hope is folded neatly and sent down the road. London's rulers are not fools. They understand the stakes. What they lack is leverage. Their city is important enough to be noticed, but not important enough to command immediate loyalty. They sit in the uncomfortable middle ground where responsibility is high and power is limited. Every decision feels like a gamble. Every gamble feels personal. The citizens sense this uncertainty, even if they cannot name it. Confidence from above is thin, stretched too tight to cover every fear below. People begin to look not to their leaders, but to each other, to family, to neighbors, to familiar faces that might offer reassurance simply by existing. Night falls again. Guards take positions along the walls and near the river, stamping their feet against the cold, telling themselves that vigilance is the same as control. Torches flicker, casting shadows that move more decisively than the men holding them. Every splash in the water draws attention. Every creak of wood invites speculation. The city waits. Waiting is exhausting. It drains energy without offering release. Men on watch imagine scenarios, play them out in their minds, revise them, discard them. None of these imagined victories feel convincing. The enemy, whoever he is, remains flexible in the imagination. Always just one step ahead. In quieter moments, someone admits the uncomfortable truth. London does not really know how to defend itself against people like this. Its defenses are designed for sieges and declarations, not for sudden arrivals and swift withdrawals. Its strength lies in endurance, not agility. Against an enemy that chooses when and where to strike, endurance becomes a weakness. There is dark humor in this realization, though it is rarely spoken aloud. The idea that the city's best defense is the hope that the attackers will lose interest has a certain bleak elegance. It requires no resources, no training, no bloodshed, just patience and luck. Unfortunately, luck has never been a strategy that improves with repetition. London's leaders retire for the night eventually. They must. Decisions made without sleep tend to unravel in daylight. They leave behind guards, orders, and a city balanced between readiness and denial. The walls stand. The river flows. The militia waits. What London does not see is that on the other side of this waiting is not chaos but attention, not haste but calculation. The men who have noticed London have not done so casually. They have watched the same river, traced the same curves, measured the same distances. They have considered the walls and the watches and the arguments that must surely be happening behind them. They are not counting on fear alone. London hopes for delay. The Vikings plan for arrival. And patience, as it turns out, belongs far more naturally to those who have already decided what they are going to do. The night that decided everything, when Longships slid up the Thames. The night does not announce itself. It never does. There is no signal, no final warning, no dramatic shift in the air that says, this is the moment history turns. If anything, the world grows quieter, as if it knows sound would only get in the way. The fog thickens over the Thames, soft and patient, blurring edges, swallowing distance. Water and sky become the same color. Direction loses meaning. And then, without spectacle, the Longships arrive. They do not cut through the river so much as they become part of it, low in the water, narrow, built for this exact purpose. No lanterns hang from their sides. No voices carry across the surface. Oars dip in and out with a discipline so practiced it barely disturbs the current. Each movement is deliberate, each pause measured. The men aboard do not rush. Rushing is for people who are unsure. From the shore, if anyone were looking, and no one is, not yet, the ships would be almost invisible. Shadows inside shadows. The fog does most of the work. The river does the rest. London has always trusted the Thames. Tonight the trust is returned in a different form. Somewhere along the bank, a dog lifts its head. At first it does not bark, it listens. Animals often understand things sooner than people do, but understanding does not always lead to noise. The dog's ears twitch, its body stiffens. It smells something unfamiliar. Not danger exactly, but otherness. Salt where there should be mud, leather where there should be grass. Then it barks. Once. Twice. Urgently. A window opens somewhere, just a crack. A man leans out, irritated, ready to curse the animal and go back to sleep. He sees nothing. Fog. River. Darkness, doing what darkness always does. He closes the window again, telling himself the dog will settle. Dogs always do. On the Longships, no one reacts. They have heard dogs before. The oars continue their rhythm, slow, even, almost gentle. The riverbank approaches in fragments, a post here, a tree there, a familiar bend in the water remembered from careful observation. These men are not guessing. They are following a plan rehearsed long before this night existed. In London, sleep fractures. Someone turns over, heart suddenly racing with no dream to blame. Someone else wakes to the distant sound of water and feels an unexplainable urge to count their children. In a small house near the river, a candle is lit, quickly shielded by a hand, as if light itself might attract attention. It does. The ships adjust their course slightly, barely noticeable, drifting past the glow. There is no urgency. Plenty of night remains. Guards on the wall shift their weight, stamping feet against the cold. One of them squints into the fog, convinced for a moment that it moved differently than before. He says nothing. Saying something would require confidence, and confidence is fragile at this hour. He tells himself it is just the river. It has always sounded like that. He has stood here many nights. This one is no different. History does not argue with him. The longships reach the shallows. Oars lift silently, blades dripping water that vanishes into the river without a sound. The hulls scrape softly against mud and stone. Men step out, boots sinking slightly, bodies already leaning forward, already moving. They know exactly where they are. There is no shout, no horn, no declaration. That comes later in other stories told by people who were not here. What happens instead is disorienting in its quiet. Doors are found, not broken. Locks are cut, not challenged. A man who steps outside to investigate a sound does not return, and his absence is noted only much later when someone wonders why the house feels emptier than it should. Somewhere, a guard finally shouts. The sound cracks through the night like glass. Too loud, too late. Other voices answer, confused, overlapping. Torches flare to life, revealing more shadows than clarity. Orders are given, then contradicted. The city stirs, but it does not wake cleanly. It wakes the way people do from deep sleep. Disoriented, slow, unsure of what is real. The Vikings move through this confusion with practiced ease. They do not chase noise, they avoid it. They flow around resistance rather than crashing into it. Where they meet opposition, it is brief, efficient, unromantic. There is no time for heroics. Heroics get in the way of survival. Inside London, the idea of defense finally meets reality. Militia members run to positions they practiced reaching in daylight, only to find those paths unfamiliar in darkness. Spears catch on door frames, shields bang against walls. Commands are lost in the fog. Courage appears, then hesitates, waiting for instructions that never quite arrive. This is not a battle in the way songs imagine battles. There are no lines, no clear fronts, just pockets of chaos blooming and fading in different parts of the city. A clash here, a retreat there. Moments of bravery swallowed immediately by confusion. Some people fight, some hide, most do a little of both. Church bells begin to ring, not as a warning, but as an instinct. A call that has always meant something is wrong, even if no one remembers exactly what it is meant to accomplish. The sound carries, heavy and uneven, bouncing off stone and fog. For a moment, it feels like London is speaking with one voice. The men from the north listen, register the information, and continue. They know what bells mean. They have heard them before. In a narrow street, two men face each other, both afraid, both convinced they are defending something essential. One will survive, one will not. The difference has less to do with morality than with timing. History rarely rewards intent. Elsewhere, a family huddles in silence, counting seconds between footsteps outside. The mother presses a hand over her child's mouth, not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to remind. The child does not cry. Children learn quickly on nights like this. The fog refuses to lift. It is complicit now, or perhaps simply indifferent. Torches illuminate small circles of certainty surrounded by vast uncertainty. Every shadow could be empty. Every empty space could be full. The Vikings take what they came for with speed that feels almost calm. They do not linger where they are not needed. They do not burn indiscriminately. Fire is a tool, not a statement. Used carefully, it distracts. Used carelessly, it traps. They know the difference. London burns in places, not everywhere, enough to matter. By the time the militia begins to organize into something resembling resistance, the shape of the night has already been decided. There are moments, small, fierce moments, where London pushes back successfully. A group of defenders holds a corner longer than expected. A shout turns into a rally. For a breath or two, it feels like this might change things. It does not. The Vikings withdraw as smoothly as they arrived, not because they are beaten, but because they are finished. Goals met, risks rising. There is no reason to test fate when the night has already been generous. Longships slip back into the Thames, carrying weight they did not have before. Oars dip again. The river accepts them without comment. On shore, London stands stunned. The bells slow, then stop. Smoke hangs low, mingling with fog until the two become inseparable. People emerge cautiously from hiding, scanning streets that look familiar and wrong at the same time. Doors stand open, items are missing. Some people are missing too. There is no single moment when London understands what has happened. Understanding arrives gradually, in pieces. A burned roof, an empty bed, a body covered carefully because even now, decency insists on ritual. Dawn approaches, pale and reluctant. As light creeps in, it reveals not devastation, but something more unsettling: continuity. The city is still here. The walls still stand. The river still flows. London has survived, but survival is not victory. There are no heroes walking the streets at sunrise, no figures elevated above the rest, no stories that end cleanly. There are only people who are alive and people who are not, and the uncomfortable realization that the difference between the two is thinner than anyone wanted to believe. Someone says it aloud, not as a joke, but as a fact. There were no heroes last night, only survivors. The statement lands heavily because everyone knows it is true. And as the fog slowly thins, London looks at itself and understands something it did not before. The night has passed, but it has not gone away. The morning after, when silence became more frightening than screams. Morning arrives without ceremony. It does not rush to explain itself, nor does it offer comfort. Light seeps slowly into London as if unsure whether it is welcome, revealing a city that looks familiar only at a distance. Up close, everything feels slightly misaligned, as though the night has nudged reality just enough to make it uncomfortable to stand in. Smoke lingers in thin, exhausted strands, rising from places where fire worked briefly and then lost interest. Doors hang open, some forced, some simply abandoned in haste. Windows are broken not dramatically but efficiently. The air smells of damp ash and river water, a combination that settles deep in the chest. No one speaks loudly. Voices, when they appear, stay close to the ground, as if sound itself might still be dangerous. People step outside cautiously, not because they expect the attackers to return at dawn, but because their instincts have not yet caught up with the sun. They look left and right, then up, scanning rooftops and streets. With the same careful attention they gave shadows hours earlier. Neighbors acknowledge each other with nods rather than words. Language feels unnecessary, perhaps even intrusive. Everyone is doing the same calculation, the same inventory, pretending not to notice that everyone else is doing it too. What is still here? What is gone? And what will never answer again? Inside homes, the process is quiet and methodical. A chest is opened, empty. A shelf is checked, still intact. Someone counts spoons. Someone else counts children. These are not equal acts, but both are treated with the same seriousness. Relief arrives in fragments, unevenly distributed. It is possible to feel grateful and hollow at the same time, and London discovers this ability quickly. Survivors move through rooms, touching objects, as if to reassure themselves that the world still has weight, that tables remain solid, that walls still separate inside from outside, that the night did not erase everything. The river looks unchanged, which feels almost insulting. It moves on, reflective and calm, as if it has not just been an accomplice. People stand along its banks longer than necessary, staring into the water with a new expression. It is no longer scenery. It is no longer simply useful. It is a reminder. London learns, belatedly, that the sea and the river are not just for trade and reflection. They are roads, and roads invite traffic. This lesson settles in slowly with a bitterness that does not ask permission. At the monasteries, the loss is more visible. Doors that once stood as symbols of sanctuary now bear marks of intrusion. Gold is gone, yes, taken cleanly and with obvious intent. But gold is not what troubles the monks most, even if they say it is. What truly stings is the realization that faith did not deter anyone. That prayer did not stop hands from reaching into sacred spaces. That holiness, it turns out, does not double as armor. Candles are relit, psalms are spoken, but the words feel thinner now, stretched over an absence that no amount of ritual quite fills. The militia regroups in small clusters, comparing impressions rather than victories. There are no proud recountings of battle, no clear narratives to pass along. Instead, there are pauses, corrections, admissions of confusion. I thought they were over there. No, I heard them closer. Memory already begins its work of rearranging events into something more bearable. Some will remember fighting longer than they did. Others will remember hiding less. This is not dishonesty. It is survival of a different kind. Leadership emerges cautiously, faces drawn, voices steady in a way that suggests practice rather than confidence. They speak of resilience, of rebuilding, of the city's strength. These words land unevenly. Strength feels like an abstract concept this morning, useful for speeches, but difficult to locate in the streets. London is not broken, but it is changed. The difference is subtle, yet unmistakable. A layer has been stripped away, exposing something raw beneath. Trust, once lost, does not announce its departure. It simply fails to return. By midday, life begins to resume its shape, though the outline is rough. Markets reopen in limited form. People barter more than usual, reluctant to part with coin that might be needed later. Jokes appear cautiously, testing the air. One man remarks with a tired smile that London has learned something important at last. The sea is not just there to be admired. The laughter that follows is brief and brittle, but it exists, and that matters. Humor, even strained, is a sign that people intend to continue. Yet beneath the surface activity, something deeper is shifting. London does not simply mourn what it lost. It recalculates. The city begins, almost unconsciously, to adjust its expectations of the world. Safety is no longer assumed. Distance no longer comforts. The idea that danger belongs somewhere else, to someone else, has been quietly retired. This realization does not come with panic. It arrives with fatigue, a long-term exhaustion that settles into the bones and plans to stay. As the day wears on, messengers are sent, reports are written, and damage is assessed. But there is an unspoken understanding that lists and tallies capture only the surface. What happened last night cannot be fully recorded because it did not only take objects, it altered perception. London now sees itself differently, not as a place protected by habit and history, but as a place noticed. And being noticed carries consequences. The silence of the morning lingers long after voices return. It sits behind conversations, behind footsteps, behind the routine sounds of a city trying to reassure itself. This silence is not empty. It is full of questions that have not yet found words. Questions about return, about repetition, about whether last night was an exception or an introduction. By evening, the fog has lifted completely and the sky looks almost kind. But London does not relax into it. Somewhere between dawn and dusk, the city has understood something crucial. The men who came in the night were not driven only by destruction. They were not finished by dawn. They had not come merely to break and vanish like a storm. They had come, London realizes, with the patience of people who know how to come back. Living with fear, when Vikings became the neighbors. Fear, when it cannot be removed, eventually changes shape. It stops screaming and starts negotiating. London does not make this transition deliberately. It happens the way most historical shifts do, quietly, unevenly, and without anyone standing up to announce that a new phase has begun. The city wakes up one morning and realizes that the men it once whispered about in terror are no longer just visitors from the dark. They are still here, not on ships this time, but on land, walking its streets, speaking its language badly, learning it quickly. The raids do not stop immediately, but they change. They become less dramatic, less shocking, and somehow more unsettling. Violence gives way to presence. The Longships still come, but some of them do not leave as quickly. Camps become shelters. Shelters become homes. What was once an incursion slowly, almost politely, turns into settlement. London notices this the way one notices an unfamiliar piece of furniture that has been there long enough to stop questioning how it arrived. The Vikings begin to appear in daylight. Not in armor, not with weapons raised, but with goods, furs, amber, ironwork, things London wants and things London does not yet know how to value. Trade begins awkwardly, conducted with careful distance and forced neutrality. No one smiles at first, hands hover near belts out of habit, but trade has its own gravity. Coins change hands, goods are exchanged, no blood is spilled. This feels important. Some Vikings stay. They build homes near the river, where they feel comfortable, where the water still makes sense to them. They repair boats, they fish, they work. London watches them with suspicion sharpened by familiarity. It is one thing to fear a stranger who appears in the night. It is another to share a market with someone who once terrified you, and now argues over prices. Children adjust faster than adults. They always do. They hear new accents and mimic them. They learn new words without caring where they come from. They play together in the streets, inventing games that mix languages and gestures. Parents notice this with unease. The future, they realize, is less loyal to old fears than they hoped. Intermarriage follows, quietly and inevitably. A union here, another there, practical at first, strategic even, then personal. Love is not required, but it does not hurt. Names blend, traditions overlap. A Viking feast incorporates local bread. A London household adopts a northern custom without remembering where it came from. Identity, once so sharply divided, begins to blur at the edges. The church hesitates, then adapts. Conversion becomes a topic of conversation, sometimes sincere, sometimes convenient. Gods are discussed the way trade routes are, carefully with an eye toward advantage. Some Vikings accept baptism, some do not. London learns, reluctantly, that belief is not always the most important thing about a person. Reliability matters more. Administration catches up eventually. Agreements are made, taxes are levied. The idea that these former enemies now contribute to the city's upkeep would have seemed absurd not long ago. Now it is merely ironic. London does not like the Vikings, but it likes their money. It likes stability. It likes knowing who owes what and when. Order has a way of smoothing resentment. This is not peace in the romantic sense. There are still tensions, still fights, still memories that surface unexpectedly. Someone remembers a burned roof. Someone else remembers a missing brother. Forgiveness is not universal, and it is rarely complete. But life continues, and life has a remarkable ability to prioritize the present over the past. London changes subtly. The sound of the city shifts, new words enter common speech, new names appear in records. The river feels busier, more purposeful. Defensive thinking evolves. Walls are repaired differently now, with an understanding born from experience rather than theory. Watches are reorganized. River access is monitored with new seriousness. The city no longer assumes that danger will announce itself loudly. At night, people still wake to sounds, but they wake differently. Less panic, more attention. London has learned the cost of surprise, and it has no desire to pay it again. The city does not sleep deeply anymore. It rests lightly, aware that vigilance is the price of survival in a world that has proven itself unpredictable. The Vikings, for their part, adapt as well. They learn which customs matter and which can be ignored. They learn how far they can push, and when restraint is the smarter option. They become invested, literally and figuratively. A man who owns land thinks differently about burning it. A man with family ties thinks twice about chaos. Stability becomes valuable. This is the quiet part of history that rarely makes it into songs. No grand battles, no dramatic betrayals. Just people learning how to live next to each other because the alternative is too exhausting. London becomes harder but also more complex, less innocent but more resilient. The presence of the Vikings forces the city to grow up, to recognize that the world does not sort itself neatly into friends and enemies. Sometimes it sorts itself into neighbors you would not have chosen, but must now understand. And beneath all of it, the memory remains. The foggy night, the silent ships, the realization that safety is conditional. From that point on, London never quite sleeps the same way again. The legacy of a sleepless night. Time, as London learns, does not erase events. It files them down. It smooths their sharpest edges and leaves behind shapes that are easier to live with but harder to ignore. Years pass after the night the Longships came, and the city changes in ways that feel gradual to those living inside it and obvious to anyone looking back. What once felt like an interruption becomes a reference point. Conversations begin with before and after, even when no one says those words out loud. The Viking night does not linger as a single memory. It stretches itself thin across generations, becoming part of how London understands what it is and what it must be prepared to face. The first changes are practical. Walls are repaired, then raised, not out of pride but necessity. Stone is set more carefully this time, reinforced with the uncomfortable knowledge that beauty does not stop boats. Openings along the river are reconsidered. Gates are narrowed. Watch schedules are rewritten with less optimism and more realism. London stops assuming that age equals strength. Old Roman defenses are no longer admired for what they once represented, but evaluated for what they can still do. Sentiment is quietly retired in favor of function. Law follows architecture, as it always does. Rules become clearer, penalties become firmer. The city learns that ambiguity is a luxury best enjoyed in peaceful times. Disputes over land, trade, and allegiance are handled with increasing precision. Records are kept more carefully. Names are written down, not just remembered. London begins the slow process of turning memory into structure. This is not driven by ideology. It is driven by fatigue. Chaos is exhausting. Order, even imperfect order, feels like rest. Yet the most significant changes are invisible. The way London thinks about itself shifts almost without notice. It no longer imagines danger as something distant, something that happens at the edges of maps or in the stories of travelers. The edges have moved inward. The city understands now that being connected means being exposed. Rivers, roads, and markets are no longer neutral features. They are possibilities, and possibilities demand attention. London grows alert, not paranoid, but aware. Awareness becomes part of its identity. Children grow up hearing about the night as something that happened long ago, but not so long ago that it feels unreal. It is spoken of with a strange balance of caution and pride. We survived, people say, leaving unsaid the parts about how narrow that survival was. The story changes slightly with each telling, polished just enough to make it bearable. The fear remains, but it is contained, turned into a lesson rather than a wound. The Vikings, too, become part of this layered memory. No longer simply raiders, no longer simply neighbors. They occupy a more complicated space. Their presence has altered London in ways that cannot be undone, and over time this alteration loses its bitterness. Trade routes established during uneasy cooperation become permanent. Skills are exchanged. Words from the north settle into local speech so deeply that no one remembers when they arrived. Even conflict leaves behind infrastructure. London begins to resemble something sturdier than it was before, not because it is invincible, but because it has accepted vulnerability as a constant. This acceptance does not weaken it, it sharpens it. The city plans with the assumption that peace is temporary and preparation is permanent. This mindset spreads quietly through institutions, through habits, through the collective posture of the place. London stands differently now, metaphorically speaking, less relaxed, more balanced. There is an irony in this transformation. The very fear that once threatened to hollow the city out becomes the thing that holds it together. Shared memory creates cohesion. The knowledge that disaster is possible, that it has happened before and will likely happen again in some form, encourages cooperation where pride once ruled. London becomes better at being a city because it has learned what happens when it is not ready. Visitors notice it first, the way people watch the river, the way guards actually look where they are posted, the way questions are asked and answered with practiced seriousness. London feels older than its years now, seasoned by experience rather than age. It has learned to live with uncertainty without letting uncertainty govern every decision. At night, the city still quiets itself, but the silence has changed. It is no longer empty. It carries weight. A sense of listening runs beneath it, as if the city itself has developed a kind of awareness. Sounds are cataloged rather than ignored. Movements are noticed. This is not fear in its raw form. It is memory doing its work. The idea of what it means to build a city evolves here. London understands that stone alone is insufficient. Walls can slow danger, but they cannot explain it. Laws can punish, but they cannot predict. What truly sustains the city is its ability to remember without freezing, to adapt without forgetting. The Viking night becomes proof that endurance is not passive. It is an active process, renewed constantly through attention and adjustment. Generations later, when people walk streets paved over the paths where fog once hid longships, they do so without thinking about it. But the influence remains in the city's caution, in its resilience, in its refusal to be surprised easily. London carries its sleepless night forward, not as trauma, but as foundation. A city, after all, is not only a collection of buildings. It is a collection of decisions made under pressure, choices remembered long after the pressure has passed. London's choices, shaped by that quiet, terrible night, continue to ripple outward, influencing how it responds to every new challenge that follows. And if one listens closely, especially in the late hours when the river moves more loudly than usual, there is a sense that the past is not finished speaking. It does not shout. It does not demand. It whispers, reminding the city of what it has already learned and what it must never forget. A city, London discovers, is built not only from stone and wood, but from nights when sleep did not come easily, from fear that was endured rather than denied, from vigilance learned the hard way, from nights that refused to pass quietly. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the reach of memory but not of imagination, that night still murmurs, steady as the river, patient as history, waiting to be heard. When London sleeps again, and we do not. London sleeps now, or at least it appears to. From above, the city is a constellation of lights, steady and confident, mapped neatly against the dark. Streets glow with purpose. Bridges shine like statements. Trains move on schedule. Buildings rise where marsh and wood once struggled to exist. The river still flows through it all, obediently lit, bordered, regulated, pretending it has always known its place. Modern London looks nothing like the settlement that once huddled behind Roman stone and nervous prayers. It hums, it moves, it believes loudly in progress. People fall asleep to the sound of traffic instead of bells. Security cameras replace watchtowers. Glass and steel stand where fog once ruled unchallenged. On the surface, it feels like a different world entirely. And yet, beneath the pavement, beneath the pipes and tunnels, and layered centuries of ambition, the older city remains. It is buried, not erased. Every great city carries its past, the way the body carries old injuries, invisible most days, occasionally aching, sometimes flaring without warning. London's sleepless night never truly ended. It simply learned how to coexist with daylight. The fear that once crept through wooden streets now expresses itself as planning committees, redundancies, contingency strategies. Different language, same instinct. Walk along the Thames late at night when the crowds thin and the noise softens and the river feels closer to what it once was, darker, less decorative. Water moves the same way it always has, unconcerned with the names of bridges or the expectations of cities. If you listen carefully, you might hear more than water against stone, or you might not. The mind is excellent at filling silence with meaning. That is how history survives. London does not remember the Vikings as enemies anymore. They have been absorbed into something larger, diluted by time, transformed into museum exhibits, street names, footnotes. Children learn about them in classrooms with clean floors and clear timelines. Helmets are drawn with horns that were never worn. Stories are simplified for convenience. Fear is reduced to curriculum. But simplification does not remove influence. The city's relationship with the night is still complicated. London is awake at all hours now, lit relentlessly, as if daring darkness to try again. It sells the illusion of constant motion, constant safety, constant awareness. And yet, for all its confidence, it has never entirely trusted sleep. Not really. Somewhere deep in its structure is the memory of what happens when vigilance fades. This is not paranoia. It is inheritance. Cities like people pass lessons down without always explaining where they came from. London plans, adapts, prepares, because it learned, very early, that the world does not announce its intentions politely, that rivers connect more than they separate, that prosperity attracts attention, that safety is never permanent, only maintained. There is a quiet irony in how comfortable modern life has become. People complain about noise, about crowds, about the inconvenience of constant activity. Few realize that this endless wakefulness is, in part, the result of an ancient refusal to be surprised again. London learned not to sleep deeply, and it never quite unlearned the habit. If you stand still long enough, late enough, you might feel it. Not fear exactly, something subtler, a sense that the city is listening even when it rests, that it remembers nights when silence meant danger and sound meant confusion, that it understands how thin the line is between routine and rupture. And if you do hear something, an echo, a rhythm, a suggestion of movement, it may very well just be the wind, or the underground, or the ordinary mechanics of a modern metropolis settling into itself. Or it might be history, repeating itself softly, reminding anyone willing to listen that what feels permanent rarely is. There is a small, almost comforting thought hidden in all this. The Vikings, should they ever return, would have to buy tickets now, queue politely, navigate timetables. Even invaders must adapt to bureaucracy. Progress has its victories. modest though they may be. Still, the joke lands lightly, because humor has always been London's way of keeping unease at arm's length. The truth lingers beneath it. A city that has survived knows that survival is not an endpoint. It is a practice, renewed nightly, maintained quietly. London sleeps, yes, but not the way it once did. It sleeps with lights on, systems running, histories layered beneath its dreams. And somewhere between the glow of the present and the shadows of the past, there is a space where listening becomes more important than resting. Because some nights, if you listen closely enough, the city does not dream. It remembers.